So next up, we have Garrett, who works at Slack on their design system, SlackKit. And he spent a good chunk of his life working in the nooks and crannies of software engineering, business development, product design, and user experience. And this is actually his second time speaking at Rethink. And so let's welcome Garrett, who's going to talk about how they work together and some themes around collaboration at Slack. And if you could also share your first job or first design job ever.
I came prepared. You can all hear me in the back? Cool. Hi, I'm Garrett. I work at Slack. I live in San Francisco, just up in the Haight-Ashbury there. As you said, I've been both a designer and an engineer. I started at Slack as a front-end engineer, and that's what I've been doing for a long time, up until about a year ago when I took over our design systems team. So I lead engineering for SlackKit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. There's definitely some shared themes, and so I think you'll hear some repetition in some of the things I say. I really want to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit on some of the things that we did at Slack and some of the lessons we've learned in building a design system. And before we get too far into that, I'll talk a little bit about me and my first job. So that's me, and my chicken with matching hair. I grew up on a farm in Maryland. It's a very important detail of me. I will answer any chicken facts if anyone wants to ask questions tonight. I know way too much about chickens. My first job, this should be familiar to anyone who worked on the web in the late 90s, early 2000s. My first job was slicing up PSDs and putting them into tables in HTML. This is the first website of note that I made. The very first website I made, I don't have screenshots anymore, and unfortunately didn't get enough traffic to be archived on the web archive. That site was a fan site for Garfield the Cat and 311 the band. You had to choose which one you wanted to learn more about when you got there. I built it in Microsoft Publisher. But I cut my teeth working for a web shop in Maryland. We worked mainly with nonprofits, and the biggest client was American Civil Liberties Union. If you look closely, it's hard to see on stage, but at the very bottom it says, powered by virtual sprockets. Way back in the day, no one was actually online, so you could just put your company's name on the bottom of the website and say, we built this. That was my first job. It was great. No one knew that I was a 16-year-old kid, and I don't think that they were billing my hours as if I was a 16-year-old kid. So it was good for everyone. I learned the web, and my bosses made some money. I'm an artist too. I like to draw. I've yet to figure out how to make money doing that, but I do that almost every day. And before Slack, I worked at a company called Mapbox. I think maps are really, really, really great and really interesting to probably a lot of folks in this room because they're a combination of design, engineering, and trying to figure out an experience for how do you get a lot of data onto something in a very small space. Still love maps, but we're not here to talk about Mapbox, we're here to talk about Slack. I started there about 4 years ago in 2015, and I'm going to talk about SlackKit and basically how we built it and how we did it kind of retrospectively. So Slack has been growing very fast, as many of you probably have seen from the other side of the fence. So before we get started, I want to start with a little thought exercise. It talks about scale, and it's about humans, and it's about how we work together. So to that stage, I want to start by imagining an empty plot of land. And a person comes along, and they nod approvingly, and I think, this would be a really good place to build a little city. So they start to build a town. They set up a shop, they put a sign there, and then they start to tell people about this town. More people start coming through and seeing this town. They're like, yeah, this looks pretty nice. I like what you're doing here. So they start building their own homes and shops, and they're building things that's going pretty well. Everyone knows everyone, and they're generally getting along. You kind of know how things are done because everyone does. It's only a couple people. But then more and more people start coming in, and they realize that without road signs, people are kind of going way too fast. But there's no one actually there to enforce those patterns. There's no one there to say, hey, we should probably put some road signs up and slow people down. Everyone's too busy, though. They're just kind of focused on their own thing, just kind of trusting that everyone knows or someone's paying attention to that. It's going faster and faster. New buildings are popping up. They really need to start fixing those potholes. There's more traffic on the road, and there's semi-trucks coming through and where there didn't used to be. They're wiring electricity, and everything's just buzzing and lightning, and just there's so many people. And almost overnight, it's a metropolis. It's buzzing with traffic and just chaotic with energy. And that first person's probably left thinking, that was a bit chaotic. They watch the city grow around them almost overnight, and it's not that scale is chaotic. It's that it's hard to anticipate the problems you don't already have. We heard a lot about this in the last talk. It's exactly that. You don't actually know what's coming down the line. All you know is what you see around you. You have to add infrastructure where appropriate, but it's hard to do it when everyone's so busy just working on their own things. They kind of have blinders on. They're trusting that someone's paying attention over there. They just need to get this one thing built. They just need to make sure that their shop is doing well. And this is really what it felt like to work at Slack for the last 4 years. When I joined, we had, I think, 10 front-end engineers and 5 product designers. It's now 10 times larger than when I joined. I think I was around 150, 200 people when I joined, which is a pretty big company for me. Now we just crossed 2,000 people. And there's 100 front-end engineers and 25 product designers. That's 4 years. So I want to talk about Slack, and I want to specifically talk about kind of how we work together, how we've learned to work together as a city was blooming around us. So we'll go back to 2013, when Slack was founded. It looked like this at the time. Nostalgia, simpler times. And I wasn't there, but some really good people were, and there's about 5 people started the company. And over time, there's 30, and 50, and after about a year, there's 200 people working at Slack. And at the same time, our user growth was just going and going and going and going. Sorry. It's really difficult to quantify the impact of software. You don't really feel when you're inside building, just kind of focusing on your stuff. You know the people around you, and you have a general sense of how things are going for the company. But outside, your customers are just this order of magnitude away. It's just you and your team building away and trying to keep things running on time. And an ever-growing expanse of customers. A little repetition right there, sorry. Gives me anxiety. Software scales faster than we do, and so it's just really hard to actually prepare for that. I think this is something that actually we're probably all feeling, and I think design systems itself is really kind of keying in on this anxiety. If you look back in the last 10 years, things have changed exponentially fast. And we're all kind of left sitting here just trying to keep up with this. And it's hard to realize that all the things that we're working on, all these products we're working on, are used by millions of people. I've never seen 1 million people, but they're all around us, and they're mad, and they want things, and they just want us to do a good job. So for us, while this was going on, we had a very slow start. So Slack was built really early on with a heavy focus on functionality. I think it's always been known as a well-designed, bespoke product. Our code reflected that. It was built with jQuery. I think when I had jQuery and less, and I got there was about 100,000 lines of generated CSS, 1,000 important tags. There was no rhyme or reason to how we did our variables. We didn't have any linters. We didn't have any code patterns. We had some modules that did some things. Sometimes a feature would come along, you just put a little if statement in that thing and just call it a day and move on. And I was starting to work with designers and getting red lines on things, saying move this a couple pixels and move this there, and it felt a lot like we were missing the forest through the trees. Things like this kept coming up. What color should I use? These very basic questions. And we realized we were kind of relying on designers to maintain this consistency. But these common questions would just keep getting repeated. And it made sense because for folks who saw my first Rethink talk, we had 136 colors I audited, and some of those blues are identical, and I think they're just just an example of eyedropping, make a new color, eyedrop, make a new color, and over time you just have 1,000 hex codes there. And when you see things like this, it's a signal that something needs to change, that you need to start bringing some consistency in there. First hot tip, there's a little jalapeno there, so you know it's a hot tip. Look for these areas of uncertainty and help create clarity. These are the opportunities you want to look in, and you want to start putting these foundational pieces into your system. And I think what you'll start to find is as you start saying, this is the answer, this is what we think, people who you thought didn't care before, or people you thought would actually just be against the idea, actually now have something to debate. How many people here call themselves designers? And how many people call themselves engineers? Okay, so about 2/3, 1/3. There's been this conversation in our community for a long time about engineers just don't understand design standards or user principles or how we need to design things, or designers need to learn to code. And that's such a boring argument. because what we should be talking about is that shared objective, the thing that we actually all care deeply about, which is how the customer feels about our product and how we can actually serve that objective, how we can start figuring out how to work together and focus on those problems instead of that person doesn't get it. And it makes sense why that person doesn't get it. Their objectives and their priorities are different. That's the point. And what we need to do in our job is actually to kind of create that space for the debate to happen. So if you choose a color, put it out there and then see if it makes people mad, that's great. They're more engaged than they were before. So that's how we started. We just documented what was there. One of my first projects was actually building the Slack app directory. We built it out in about a month, and it was actually pretty clunky because all of our infrastructure and all of our design was based on the Slack client. This is a website, not an app, not a client. But in order to get that little team switcher in the top right, I actually had to go and spin up Slack in the background. So for a few weeks, when you first went to our app store, if you opened up the console, you would have seen a little message server spinning up, and you could have posted a message to that team. No one did. But when we had time, we started cleaning up some of those foundations. So that explosion of color variables was a really good place to start. So a couple of us took that problem on, looked at it, picked some new colors, made sure they were accessible, and then we just started documenting them. And we went to our respective groups. Designers went to designers, engineers went to engineers, and started saying, hey, we fixed that color thing. These are the new things you want to. These are the new colors you want to use. We put linters in place so you couldn't put hex codes anymore without a really good reason. And suddenly the pattern started getting reinforced. And people were pretty excited, so we kind of kept going on. We established a grid and started trying to figure out some more of these fundamentals, these small fundamentals. None of these big complex problems yet, but these very small things that weren't too contentious and mostly would just help people establish a shared understanding. And we did find that people really started to like these decisions being made for them. We're no longer throwing rocks at each other. It's not engineers doing this and designers doing this. It's like, okay, generally we can all agree that at least these things are the truth. So documenting one thing is incredibly valuable. Pick that one small thing and start building off of it. And then when you start to do this, you'll actually find that people believe more in the system itself. They're like, hey, that system's moving along. People are starting to establish these things. They seem to know what they're doing. So the system starts to reinforce itself. And it was important that both sides participated in this work because if you just have a designer going off alone or an engineer going off alone and saying these are the standards, and there's actually no shared understanding and no ambassador from these different groups, you're not going to be successful. So if you are a designer and you want to start doing this, find an engineering partner and vice versa if you're an engineer. Find those partners. Slack is a very specific organizational structure. We have product and engineering completely separate. So it was important for us that these two groups are well represented. So the project kept growing, and we were slowly picking up bigger pieces, buttons, form elements, font sizes. We still weren't funded, though. We were doing all this work on the side. I was still on the platform team working on the app directory stuff. But we were doing this, and it kept going, and we realized that the way that you really win is with the brand. And we had a pretty good brand sitting around already, so we just slapped a kit on it and called it a day. SlackKit. This actually was, we only announced it last week in a blog post. SlackKit has been a thing internally for about 2 years now. At first, it was a very ambitious brand, and now I think we've finally kind of grown into those clothes. So I'm happy that we were actually finally able to announce SlackKit publicly last week. But this is software, and the product and customer needs were still scaling faster than we did. So if you remember that chart of just our user numbers going up and up and up, one thing about that, Slack was actually designed for only a couple hundred people. We never thought that, at the beginning at least, that anyone with more than a couple hundred people would want to use Slack. I think within the first day, we immediately busted our first number. So we are already getting these bigger and bigger teams. And we found that a lot of our UI wasn't really built in preparation for that. So this little selection input here, it's a menu dropdown. And if it works fine for teams of a couple hundred, maybe even 1,000 people. But if you put 10,000 people into that thing, it just froze. And this is just a very small example of a much larger problem. And things like this were happening all over Slack. We had all these assumptions in our code base and assumptions in our interface that just weren't going to scale. So the front engineering team conveniently made the decision to move to React, which is a surprise, I'm sure, to no one. But for me, I was kind of sitting on the sidelines thinking like, that's great. If we're going to refactor everything, then let's just hitch along. So we had done, we'd done a fair bit of work at this point, but a lot of that was built on this legacy infrastructure and legacy assumptions, and we decided, like, all right, we got a green field, let's start fresh. And that's next spicy tip. Find these parallel initiatives and start building alongside these features. For us, the refactor was just a great opportunity to say, okay, we've been doing this kind of casually for about a year. We've got some lessons from that, both in terms of how people work, the assumptions we made, and then we know exactly where the project is starting to go, at least for the next year. The React refactor was our chance to actually start picking that apart. So this is a trope in a lot of presentations about user experience. Forgive me in advance. This may be familiar to folks who live in San Francisco. This is in the Panhandle, just to the west of here, up the hills, a few hills. I live in Haight-Ashbury. This is the intersection I see every morning when I'm coming into work. You're standing, you can't see it, but I'm standing at a dirt path right here, basically in line with that one. And if you look at the picture, you know that you definitely shouldn't skate. But more importantly, you can see that the park designers kind of had a general idea of how they wanted you to walk. And then you can see the direction that people started to walk. People just looked at the way the designers wanted them to go, and like, well, no, like that's more efficient. And they start doing that. These are called desire paths. Desire paths are a result of a large anonymous group deciding this is the way we want to go. So, our own desire paths. You've seen selects in Slack. They're probably one of our most populous user interface elements because there's a lot of forms involved in selecting things and doing things. When we started auditing our selection inputs, we found that we had a lot of different patterns. I'm using this screenshot of a much more modern one, but because I couldn't find any of the older ones, we had about 8 different selects that were doing 8 different things, but mostly the same. And some of them were fat, some of them were smaller, some of them were in modals because, and they had completely different implementation patterns for that. But when we started to audit them, we actually saw some of these common patterns. So this menu right here is actually the same menu that we could use in other places in Slack, not just for selections, but in other things. And you see these patterns and these interface elements kind of start coming out. And then we also recognize that people will want to have these variations in how they work and what they do. And so we recognize that we needed to make some room for that, make some room for both the way that you want people to go and also the way that you know that they will need to go, and start trying to find some of those edge cases. So pave the desire paths, find these common agreements, and start solidifying and sharing that understanding of them. And then leave room for people to cheat a little bit. Make sure to leave room both within your code and within your designs. Sometimes it means a refactor, and sometimes it means you kind of have to revisit things, but understand that, and I think this has been a pretty common trope, like people will find new ways of doing things. You will need to solve different problems. And you do have to kind of prepare as much as you can for that. Keeping your code modular, keeping your designs flexible, and understanding that the source of truth will always be a little bit malleable. And then when we started to pave these desire paths, when we started to say, hey, we see you're doing it this way. Have you thought about doing it maybe this way? We have these office hours. We have these open spaces to come and actually talk about these things. People did start coming to these crits, and they're like, oh, you guys are refactoring selects. Thank God, I've been fixing bugs on those things for like 2 years now. And they got really excited, so they start coming to them, and you start seeing this reinforcement of the system, this socialization starts happening. When I talk about how we build together, when I talk about working together, it's really this. It's the stuff on the bottom of everything, the people on the ground just building these things and learning, oh, like that's something I actually want to work on too, and making room to have those arguments. So last fall, our product engineering team at Slack had made the decision that we needed to invest more seriously in refactoring our code base. We had a lot more customers. We have an enterprise product. We have Slack is used. It can be used for 10 people in a very different way that it can be used for 200, 300,000 people. Same product does it. And so we wanted to actually invest more heavily in that, so we started refactoring the Slack client. But we still had a small problem. How do you get people to adopt a system they have no incentive to adopt? We became a funded team. We were told, okay, fine, you guys have been shouting forever. Here's your team. We're going to be refactoring Slack. Jump in, start organizing them. Just do it, you know? And people are looking at us like, okay, they're doing what? That's their job now? So we were in a grassroots team, but we had to work harder to answer the question, how do you get people? What's the incentive to actually help out? We had kind of wedged ourselves in between that product and engineering org. We were this team that had created this space across the ladder for people to start having these discussions and sharing these fundamentals. And we started actually creating these processes and meetings for people to debate and ask these questions. So we just continued to put our time into the actual documentation because that was the best way to reach people. In hindsight, this is something that I don't think I would have taken to heart as much, but I fully agree now. Documentation is the best thing you can do. When you document something and you have a shiny brand on it, people are like, that looks like the truth right there. And it does truly help. We also added linters that we put in place, things like no hex codes, like I said before, no vanilla elements. Even our basic form elements we wanted to wrap so that if and when we needed to, for instance, add accessibility support, add screen reader support, we had everything centralized. It's dangerous because you have a single point of failure, but if you wrote good tests and you wrote good components, then you can actually stand by those single points. And then we started kind of establishing processes for these other designers, other designers and engineers to start building on these things. Oh, sorry, that was supposed to animate. Looks nice. So this is our process. It starts with an audit, and we open this up to anyone. A designer or an engineer can actually say, look around Slack and say, you know what? I see this pattern everywhere. We're going to need to use it in our feature. Here's a collection. This doesn't have to be a comprehensive audit. It doesn't have to cover every single edge case. It's supposed to just say, here's the temperature of the water, and here's everything there. From there, a designer puts a design spec together. They talk about everything from both the component, the variations, the ways they see it being used, some potential use cases, accessibility flows, how keyboard handling needs to work if it does, screen reader, anything like that. Developer writes a technical spec, which is usually the developers working on these things tend to be building a feature at the same time. So the technical spec is kind of written alongside that feature with the understanding that this is the feature implementation, this is the component implementation. And this is great. This is really unique work for someone who's not actually on a design systems team to do, because they get a chance to kind of try some of this on, see what it's like to build a component in a generic way, not just for their feature, but for the entire team. We do the component development. We use Storybook. We build it in isolation. And then they actually start applying in the feature. And that's the part where I kind of describe component development when you're building in a sandbox and just kind of building the various implementations of component. It solves about 80% of it. The feature development is where you can kind of start testing out your API, testing out the props that you've decided on, and making sure that it actually does make sense in a feature. And then the SlackKit team does a quality review. We look at accessibility, we look at the patterns there, we make sure the component will actually work, we make sure it's flexible, we make sure the code's up to snuff, that it's well documented, and we actually start working with them to put a draft together for the documentation. We document it on our site, and then we make an announcement to the company. This is what SlackKit looks like now. It's private for now. We'll be opening it up over time once we have some time to come up for air. But this is the documentation, and this is how it works. It's heavily edited. It's written by both designers, engineers, and the folks who do our content writing. And for every one of these components, along with the process, we actually establish some guidelines for how do we measure things in that quality review. So all our components have to be high quality and robust, and they have to follow the high standards of the product design. I mentioned, Slack is a very well-designed and known for being a well-designed product, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't threaten that and that we actually reinforced it. We did that. Have to be accessible. This comes up a lot, I think, especially with design systems. We kind of have become the ambassadors for accessibility alongside the actual accessibility teams. So they have to work for everyone regardless of how they interact with Slack. They have to be extensible and make appropriate room for those future divergences. I mentioned before modularity. We try to, if we ever get into these complex components like select, the select component ourselves is actually a bunch of different selection inputs with the same shared menu. The menu always has to just be a single action item, but you can do a basic select where you point and click. You can have a search select where you type ahead. You can have a multi-select where you type ahead, search, and then collect tokens that you also have to be able to navigate. So we had to build all this flexibility into our components there. And because they are a single point of failure, they have to be reliable and more reliable than almost anything else. We never want to be the thing that breaks Slack. And they had to work quickly, and they had to be performant. So it had to work for 10 people, it had to work for hundreds of thousands of people. So the way you get to people to adopt a system is you just are a foundation of quality. You make people feel confident that your system has actually got their backs, that they can rely on it, and that they can trust it. Your system's useful if it helps people, and the best way to help people is to remove the decisions that are getting in their way. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the more decisions you can make for people and get them focused on the things that they're trying to solve, which are usually really cool features or really interesting things, the less they have to worry about, will this thing actually break down if someone pushes command plus 10 times. Build tools to enforce these processes, build places and rooms for people to discuss decisions, and build a net to grab the stuff that falls between the cracks. So today, I skipped over a lot of stuff. I've just tried to summarize 4 years of a lot of things. I didn't get into all the spicy stuff. I'm happy to talk about that tonight at the happy hour if you grab me. But I only have a short time on stage. But where are we today? It took a long time for us to take root. I mentioned that we only became a funded team last year. I've been doing this for most of my time at Slack, so almost 4 years. Just one component, though, thoroughly documented, was immensely valuable, and it created this self-fulfilling system that started to reinforce itself. And we went from simple things to more and more complex patterns. This one's for this crowd. Working on infrastructure like this is really, really hard, and especially in a place where new things are happening all the time. It could feel like you're at a party, and you're having a great time, and you're dancing and hanging out. But then, slowly, you start to realize you're not really on the dance floor anymore. You notice that there's a kind of, glasses are stacking up, and you feel bad for the host, so you start doing the dishes. I imagine a lot of people here are that kind of person who sees a mess and just says, I have to go help clean that up. And that's hard, because you're sitting there, this party's going on around you, and you're just in there cleaning the dishes. But you'll also see, because we're humans, people start to feel a little bit guilty. They start to think, oh man, they're in there doing the dishes. Maybe I should clean up my mess a little bit. These systems start reinforcing themselves. Humans like to follow humans. We like community. You have to learn how to enjoy doing the dishes. I love doing the dishes personally, but you have to do this work, you have to enjoy doing that. And you have to enjoy letting people have fun and knowing that you're helping them do that. If you do it right, you start to see that impact play out on a much grander scale. And it's gratifying because you're at a place like Slack that's going to keep growing and growing and scaling around you. Things will always keep changing. You can kind of harness that growth and try these different things and look for those other people that want to help. And you'll see that around them, you start seeing these communities reinforce themselves. The system from the grassroots means that people have to serve those that they're closest to. You start spreading these ideas, and then those ideas spread to other people. And we build them carefully and with consideration, it can help things go smoothly. So there was this all hands, pretty early on in my time at Slack. We were about, I think, 250, 300 people, and our CEO, Stuart, said on stage, I think this was like 2016, we were getting ready for another big year of growth, and he said, the majority of people that will build Slack don't work here yet. And that was really profound to me, because he was right. The next year, I think we were about 800, 900 people, so almost 3 times bigger. And that group that he had talked to was the minority within that new size company. We were 1/3. But I also thought about it, and I was like, okay, so 600 people are going to come in. They don't know any of the prior art. All they know is what we're going to tell them and what we're trying to do. So I made a point of trying to have coffee with all the new front-end engineers coming in. And I was like, hey, you heard about this design system we're working on? It's great. You should try it out. This is what I'm trying to do. If you're vulnerable, I tend to be, you can let them know kind of where you're failing or where you need help. And you'll start to see that these people don't know any better. They just want to help. They know that this system is trying to be helped. But they also know that you're trying to do something bigger. And they know, too, that they are in the minority of the people that will work at Slack, too. They are in the minority because that company is going to keep growing. The product's going to keep growing. Your customer base is going to keep expanding around you. But if you stick with people and help trying to solve their problems, they'll return the favor down the line. Scale means that you can build things today that'll grow much larger tomorrow. A lot of us work at companies that are constantly scaling. This system is very much intended for folks who are in these similar environments, these places where we're working for something that's much, much bigger than ourselves and is probably growing much, much bigger than ourselves. If you establish these principles early and help these new people bring their fresh perspective and energy to building them out, it'll actually go much smoother. And if you do it right, you'll find yourself back dancing at the party sometimes and helping to build new features. Like dark mode. So we launched this last week. This was great because SlackKit took about 3.5 years to build and dark mode took about 2.5 weeks because we had established all of these principles there. We were aware of the tweets, we were aware of the demands, and we wanted to do it, but we had a lot of stuff we had to do first. This for us was kind of the first very real feature that came out of a design system. We were able to take our color set, we actually did rejigger it a bit. We thought more about the grays, the whites. But for the most part, Slack in dark mode is a flip of SlackKit's color set with a couple additional options to clean the edges a bit. So in summary, look for those areas of uncertainty to help create clarity. Documenting one thing is incredibly valuable. I cannot overstate how important documentation is. I'm blown away. I will always advocate for documentation because when you're at a fast-growing org, chances are your documentation is not great. So if you have documentation, if it looks good and it's actually says good things and has good ideas, people will tend to follow it. Find parallel initiatives to build alongside of them, pave those desire paths, and be that foundation for quality. Thank you. I'm on Twitter if you want to argue. Thanks.